Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to be. Can I walk around? Okay. Good afternoon. It's good to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I much appreciate being here. As an engineer, I love being here at New Mexico Tech. It's just such an honor and privilege to be around people who understand when we start talking about the policy aspects, but they have a rooted understanding of what energy and the nexus between water or air or carbon or whatever we're talking about means. So it's good to be here, and I very much appreciate it. Um, I don't have any prepared slides. I know you saw Secretary Kenderdine, and she always has a fantastic slide deck. I'm going to go on the other side of the opposite side of that and have absolutely no slides to share with you today. So, but what I would like to do and get you ready for some questions is start thinking about what your questions would be for the Environment Secretary. You know, the New Mexico Environment Department has grown substantially from the time that I came in 2019. We focus on air, water, waste, the things that sometimes promote or get in the way of building a really strong economy and a really strong economy that embraces energy. So I'm really proud that we have grown in a way that recognizes the importance of all sorts of energy in the state of New Mexico. We've gone from an annual budget of about 90 million, and in FY26 we'll be at 200 million. Let me just also tell you that that growth is largely in federal funds that we're bringing into the state, and largely through permit fees that we collect the revenue for and run our department. So in actuality, in the last fiscal year, we took about $25 million from the general fund and returned $30.4 million in general fund. So we are a net neutral, if not positive, return on investment at just about, let me think about it, 18.4% for the legislative dollars that have been appropriated to us. So really proud of that, and really proud that we are now down to an 8% vacancy rate. And I heard the last panel before lunch talking about how important it is to get people trained up in everything from mining to oil and gas to hydrogen. Well, they weren't talking about all of that. I'm now ad-libbing a little bit, but they were talking about just building staff capacity and building knowledge in the state. And there's no greater opportunity to do that than in a place like New Mexico Tech, and bring those students who are so incredibly smart in the undergrad or in the master's program into state government. You will never have more responsibility as an intern or somebody coming into state government, as a student, than coming into government of some kind, because government is not a deep bench, and you will immediately have millions of dollars that you're administering in one way, shape, or form. And it's really a powerful place to start your career. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Miori Harms is here. Miori is our uranium mining coordinator. She's very much in the back corner of the room. But Miori is a great resource at the New Mexico Environment Department for all things uranium, and really value that she's here and working at our department. So let me just tell you a couple things, just to kind of get your mindset around like what I'm excited about and what's happening at the Environment Department, or maybe throughout the state of New Mexico. So, yesterday you talked a little bit about carbon capture, sequestration. I'm very much excited that our Energy and Minerals and Natural Resources Department is working with New Mexico Tech and the PRRC on getting that Class 6 primacy moved forward. So important for us, if we're going to promote things like hydrogen, to have a CCS program in the state of New Mexico. As a former Fed myself and working for EPA, I saw what it took for North Dakota to get their Class 6 primacy, and in fact was instrumental in helping them get it at the last minute, and know that that's a big lift. So again, Class 6 primacy is something so important to the state of New Mexico. And when I say that, I mean to the governor, to the cabinet, and to the industry who's going to rely upon it. So that's really an important next step, because more than carbon emissions, we tend to now talk about carbon intensity. And if we're not talking about carbon intensity, we're kind of talking about the wrong thing, in my opinion. And carbon intensity is so important when we think about, are we going to create hydrogen from the oil and gas sector with low carbon, or are we going to create hydrogen out of biofuels or organic material? And in support of the hydrogen sector, as well as decarbonization of the transportation sector, we became the fourth state in the country to adopt a low carbon fuel standard for the transportation sector. If any of you know what went into that, it was just a quick 4 years through the legislature for us to get to that point. That was a joke, actually, because nothing was quick and it was painful. And most of my 2 a.m. moments in the House or Senate chamber were over that bill. So there's nothing quick about it, but we're there. And what we're starting to see now is really cool, because we're starting to see investment coming into New Mexico to build out those low carbon fuels and reduce the carbon intensity of everything from our diesel fuels, and balance that against our gasoline, which the low carbon fuel standard does allow. It's agnostic on the fuel, but it is very much interested in the most aggressive technologies that could both produce low carbon fuels and get them to market quickly. So excited that we're going to put those rules out. If the staff were here that were working on it, they'd be really nervous about what I'm about to say right now. But hopefully those rules will be out by the end of the year, and if not right after, but we'll get those to the Environmental Improvement Board, and they're the ones that adopt the rules at the end of the day. So we propose, and then there'll be hearings, and we adopt those. They will adopt those rules, hopefully. So look forward to a low carbon fuel transportation program coming soon to New Mexico. First market mechanism in the carbon space that we'll be adopting. I mentioned hydrogen a couple times now. We're also seeing, I heard yesterday, there's a little bit of a discussion of the WISH project, which the Department of Energy made a huge mistake by not funding the state of New Mexico's project. And if there's media here, let me say it again. The Department of Energy made a huge mistake by not granting the WISH project funding. We're really proud of who our project partners were in that project, in that grant application. And I will tell you that all of those project partners are in some way still moving forward. So while it would have been nice to get the federal dollars, we can often look at it as making a little bit of lemonade, in that the hydrogen hub applications that did get funded, many of those are in various stages, and I'm not going to criticize them, but they're in various stages of negotiation. And for various reasons, they're sort of in a precarious state. Our project partners are able to move forward without those federal dollars. It would have been nice to have. It might have accelerated things. It brought us even more associated investment faster. But again, we're moving forward on those projects, and that feels really good to know that. We also, I'll evolve this conversation a little bit more. One more thing around hydrogen. How many of you are as nerdy an engineer as me that you're following the U.S. Treasury's hydrogen production tax credit? Yes, we have. Okay, my people. So the state of New Mexico wrote a really compelling letter to the U.S. Treasury, and gave them official comment during the open docket and said, hey, New Mexico is a state that has decarbonized its power sector, it's decarbonizing its transportation sector, it's decarbonizing the oil and gas sector. Some of these are laws, some of these are rules. We're working on things like produced water. So we're doing all this work. Give us an equivalency to the hydrogen production tax credit. Let us tell you that we as a state have taken a leadership role in what we're doing here in New Mexico, and we should have equivalency to whatever the federal production tax credit is. We have yet to hear back. They're supposed to publish the final rule, I believe, this month. And we'll see what happens. Final rules now in this administration, and with what's the election that just happened, we'll see what sticks, what doesn't stick. But nonetheless, the current administration is going to publish their final rules this month, and we're hoping that we made a compelling case to the U.S. Treasury and the Department of Energy to say that we should have equivalency to this. Like, don't tell us how to get there. Give us the destination. Let us get there on our own. So I'm going to be watching that, just like all of you will be watching that now that you know that that's about to happen. And then I'm going to switch over to produced water here, or just water reuse in general. So we took a big swing. Actually, I'm going to give ourselves some credit as a state that many of the folks in this room and folks at NMSU and UNM and the Environment Department, we got together in 2019 and we put together an agreement that we would work. We signed it with NMSU specifically, that we would create this produced water consortium. If you go to any of the conferences, and I've been to Midland a bunch on the conferences they're having around produced water, every conference that I go to is full of New Mexico researchers. I mean, it is literally like I'm going to Midland to hear from New Mexico Tech, to hear from NMSU, and I'm just so proud of that we are that state by which every other state is looking at how does water reuse, especially around produced water, work. So we've gone a long, far way. And if you personally asked me in 2018, when I was still at EPA working on produced water, I would have said to you, I don't think the science is there. I know, because I said it, the science isn't there in 2018. I am a complete convert, and some of my aha moments happened walking on this campus, actually. That I think we are there for treatment of produced water, certainly for fit for purpose uses, and then also for the ensuring that we have the right protections in place for treatment and discharge. I said it. I think we're there at this point on the science. And I'm really excited to know that we're going to move forward with New Mexico Tech, with UNM, NMSU, and many industry partners. So why am I bringing up produced water again? That not just because there's another panel coming up right after this around water energy nexus, but we as a state have to figure out exactly what we're going to do. We have no more fresh water than we had. We have less fresh water than we had. So let's continue to put that fresh water to the highest and greatest use, which is community drinking water. And let's figure out how Maxion, EBON, Star Scientific, Avangrid, PNM, let's figure out how do we get them the water they need to deliver on the energy we need without utilizing and consuming our freshwater resources. It's very simple. We have to look at produced water and treat it in that way for fit for purpose use. And what I put up here, which is just so not impressive in terms of what you saw from Secretary Kenderdine, we have a feasibility study that we put together and released that has some really interesting graphics in it. And they didn't PDF right, that's why I'm not showing them to you. But the graphics show you how much fresh water is being used for things like foundations for wind turbines. So let's think of it this way. If we're going to use fresh water to meet the federal dollars we have to plug abandoned wells, which uses a lot of concrete, what are we doing? Why aren't we using water that's of lesser spec for the cement to plug those abandoned wells, right? So that's kind of infield use of treated produced water or water for that purpose. Like, why bring fresh water in to mix cement to cap a well? Also, why are we looking at the life cycle of every other energy source and talking about its carbon intensity, but omitting the discussion around the installation of a wind turbine or a wind field, and not counting what that effect of freshwater usage for those foundations. In other words, let's use treated produced water for that. If we're meeting the ASTM standard for the cement, and we're ensuring that the cement is going to be, not leach, if you will, into the ground. And what is the most, I mean, if you're in my field, you talk about hazardous waste and things like that all the time. What's a very common way you immobilize things that are very toxic to the environment? You put them into cement. You bake them in. So these are some of the things that I think this report really speaks to. The comment period just closed. We're going to finalize it and put it out probably in the next 2 weeks. But it's really fascinating to me how much we've evolved the conversation around water reuse and then produced water in particular. We still have a job to do as really smart technical people to explain these concepts and the risk involved to really smart non-technical people. And that's a challenge. It's like, where was that in my engineering school? That, being prepared to be yelled at and screamed at and told that you're the downfall of what's going to happen to civil society it's daunting when you hear those things. But again, we have to make sure that we build the right protections in place. We have to understand the science really well, and we have to be somewhat brave about moving forward too. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens on our water reuse rules, which are before our board, a separate board. Hopefully they'll deliberate on those rules that we put forward in January timeframe. And then we will come back with some big, bold ideas during the legislature, the 60-day session, with the 50-year water action plan, which the governor's office put out. And there's 14 different programs in there, 14 different sort of actions, call to actions. And one of them is focusing on water reuse and making sure that we have enough water. But again, I think we're going to see all boats rise with funding on that 50-year water action plan. I think a lot of money is going to flow towards that. So I've talked at you now for like 15 minutes, and I'm sure you have some questions for me. I always say, like, no limits on the questions. I learn more when you ask me the harder things than you softball me.
Okay, so I only have like 10 questions.
All right.
But I'm gonna limit it to one. Although I am really excited about fit for purpose reuse water. That's amazing. I'm glad we're moving in that direction. But what really kind of piqued my interest is LCFS. So with the Carbon Utilization and Storage Partnership, we work with Nikola, which makes hydrogen trucks.
Mm-hmm.
And I see how the LCFS in California is changing the way businesses are operating in New Mexico and Texas. Primarily, if you think Occidental and their direct air capture, and then they're selling their gas products in California, they can get the LCFS a couple $100 a ton. Makes that more affordable. And similarly for ethanol plants up in the northern part of Texas. So the thing that always strikes me is 1,500 trucks a day moving in the Permian Basin. And all kinds of natural gas to make hydrogen. So do you think that the New Mexico version of the credit will be sufficient to incentivize people to go to hub and spoke hydrogen trucking in the southeast part of the state?
That's a good question. So the prediction on the market dynamics will dictate that answer to some degree. But I do think maybe there's hope and quantitative backing in my answer, but I think the short answer is yes, that we're going to see that. We can build in some reciprocity with other states. That's allowed in our statute, and that's something we're considering in the rulemaking. So we don't want to oversaturate our credit market, but we do want to have the ability to use other markets. But I think first and foremost, let's set up the New Mexico market and then establish whether or not, like, how it's working. So there's other drivers too inherent in your question that are in the back of my mind, which is we also adopted the advanced clean car, clean truck standards, which is going to help decarbonize. And that's the regulatory approach to push those who won't otherwise adopt towards that goal, while you have the carrot approach out there to develop credits. And we got to see how that market kind of comes together. But yes, I do think there's going to be some, and some of this is happening without even any of our incentives, with some of the larger vertically integrated companies are really starting to decarbonize every aspect that they can. That was number one.
Hi, I'm Prashant from London. I had so my main question was, so there has been a lot of talk of use of produced water for industrial use, but if you look at the reports and those things, still there is so much of hesitancy in applying for industrial uses. And if you look at the reports, people are not ready to accept it, even for industrial use. So is there a plan for that, of how do we get this acceptance? And the second thing is, produced water are very localized. It's not. So what's the plan? Is government looking for having those dedicated pipelines and those things to reach to these sites for the industrial use?
So good questions. You know, I say if you leave it up to the government to get the socialization of treated produced water, then we're in this for a long time, because nobody's going to believe the government. I believe our science. Like I don't disbelieve anything that we're doing. Because I see behind the hood of what's happening. And really we're amplifying what the good research is showing. And that's what the government is doing, trying to codify it into rules and policy. But we do need a good campaign around water in New Mexico. And that's what this feasibility study really does, is it explains and quantifies how much fresh water we could save by treating and reusing produced water. Again, fit for purpose. Not all of it's distilled level or drinking water level. I'm not even talking about that. We're bringing the TDS down enough to make cement. That's not 300 parts per million like in your drinking water. So I agree with you, and I don't have a silver bullet answer to that. I get told sometimes when I'm out talking about produced water, like, speak English, you're talking over us, right? And I'm not trying to talk over anybody. I'm trying to genuinely and earnestly explain it. Let me just tell you my idea, because you guys can help me with this. I think before Dune 3 comes out, did you all go out and see Dune 2? Okay. I think we need a real earnest, engaging campaign around water, and we need to show it before every Dune 3 movie that talks about water and the desert. You're about to sit back and relax and enjoy Dune 3. It's about water. It's about the desert. Let's talk about water in New Mexico. And I'm not joking. And if my team knows, I keep telling them, get me the design to wrap the buses, do the PSA, call Netflix, somebody get a movie maker in here, like get us what we need, because that's what it's going to take. The attention span now is no more than a tweet or a TikTok. We need to be able to put that in front of people and have them start to understand it. And we need to get to like the middle school, high school, college ages as well, because they're the next decision makers anyway. So we need to start that kind of campaign. So that's kind of my answer to your first question. And your second question.
Pipeline.
Thank you. So one of the, I'm going to say we're fortunate in New Mexico that where the produced water is generated, we have pipelines. Where the produced water is generated, we have takeaway capacity. We have some of the smartest engineers. We have some of the strongest workforce in those parts of the state. So let's go ahead and attract the industry that's going to use that water. So let's get electrolyzers there. Let's get pyrolysis facilities going there. Let's do everything we can to attract the entity, so we're not moving it. I'd rather see us, if we're gonna spend money, time, and energy to move water, I'd rather see it be the treated produced water than the untreated produced water, because accidents do occur, and treated produced water, that salt is going to create a moonscape as soon as it lands on anything that could grow. So we do want to focus on treating the produced water and utilization of it where it's needed. And some people will say to me, but sir, Secretary, if we do that, you're talking about giving Maxion in Albuquerque reuse water. Absolutely, because if we stop using the fresh water for all these industrial applications down in the Permian, it allows us to use that water, credit, if you will, up in Albuquerque. Or similarly, at the reclamation center that I was just at this week in Los Alamos, they're putting all their treated sewage on the fields in Los Alamos, the school fields, that percolates back down and gets into our groundwater table. And that gives them more water in the north, allowing us to not overly rely on the water coming down through the Rio Grande for economic and drinking water and things like that in the south. You see what I'm saying? So we have to look at water as a system, even if it's sometimes confined layers, we still have to look at it as a system. But yeah, and if you like go listen to the Economic Development Secretary, Rob Black, who is the former Chamber of Commerce for New Mexico Chamber of Commerce CEO and president. There's so much excitement happening from Hobbs to Carlsbad and then up in the San Juan about investment. It's remarkable. Yes.
So first of all, I'll help you with the Netflix thing. I do commercial real estate for a living, and am up in Los Alamos trying to figure out how we catch up on about 15,000 housing units.
Yep.
That we are behind. So my question is, how can we take some of this at a residential level for developers who are being penalized already for having to buy into water that they may or may not ever use? And it becomes an example to everybody. It's almost like the 3-minute Netflix moment.
It's a good question. So a couple things come to mind, and I keep wanting to say purple pipe. But what we need to think about and work on, and we're doing this in our department in a little bit different group than I've thus sort of maybe relied upon. But our water program has roughly $100 million in federal dollars, and they will have it for the next few years, like 100 every year, and we're working with communities to get them to do like what White Rock just did, which is that reclamation facility I just talked about. And I think if we educate people on what, and by the way, like Los Alamos, I have it in it's in my car. They actually went out. So this is part of the answer. They went out and they got the local schools to vote on an emoji. The Dookie won. It's a wastewater facility. Let that sit in for a second. The little poop emoji won, and he is the reclamation facility's sort of mascot. They have stickers that I have M&Ms now at home with his little image on them. Raised a question. And I got a little golden keychain toilet or golden toilet keychain. But those are the kinds of things like the science is there, the use is there, the funding is available to any municipality in the state of New Mexico. And the more we see like the private sector, again, like Maxion or a couple of the solar companies that I'm thinking of, that are going to reuse water and start talking about how they're offsetting the demand and how they're giving water back. One thing that I have hindsight on, and I'm still might come back to more of your question, but one thing I have hindsight on is that as we adopted the Energy Transition Act and we said, let's move to decarbonizing the power sector, We didn't really think about then in 2019, what does that mean for freshwater use? As you decarbonize power, you may have an upswing in the demand on freshwater for that power, right? Because if we went to green hydrogen alone, there goes your fresh water to green hydrogen. And in reality, like mathematically, and we have to put it in practice in how we build, green hydrogen can have a higher or lower carbon intensity than blue hydrogen. So colors of hydrogen is like, that's like, I feel like anytime someone comes up to me and says, I want to talk to you about the color or hydrogen, and they start with colors, I'm like, I'm going to get sucker punched on this. But it's carbon intensity. So again, we need to think about how the water conversation is not so divorced from the energy conversation. And that has not happened until like groups like us get together and start talking about and figure out how are we going to brand it? Is it a water emoji? Is it the Dune 3 movie? Is it like, and I'm like so serious that if we're not doing that, then we shouldn't expect the conversation to change. We really shouldn't.
So I have a quick question, one kind of mix of the two. So on the carbon economy and the class 6 primacy, as you said earlier, NMT's working this with OCD, and I'm very excited about it. If that goes wrong, what we'll hear is it causes seismicity, it could damage the water table, cause problems. From an NMED standpoint, what view would you have? What research have you done already or prepared to do to be supportive of the state seeking class 6 primacy? And I'm thinking specifically of improvements on air quality for the citizens or other things. Because when I hear hydrogen economy, if I'm a citizen, I'm not sure how that relates to me, but have you done any studies that show how it will reduce overall pollutants in the state?
So yes and no. So we've done studies on how we know the delta between where we are in terms of our carbon emissions and where we need to be at by 2040, 2050. We know that delta. Getting down to those right levels relies on multiple things, including carbon capture sequestration, multiple technologies, including that. My answer to your question is I would look at it like this, and I'm super excited that we're in conversations with multiple pyrolysis companies, and that's stripping or taking the CO2 and making carbon product like carbon solid, right? So if we get, I think in some way, the way you get social acceptance of carbon sequestration is a potential pathway is through pyrolysis first, carbon capture second. And the good thing is that EPA is not going to move any faster than EPA is going to move. So we have time for some of this, meaning that if you can show the public that we can take a feedstock and turn it into a carbon solid, so they have a visual, they understand it, they get it, and that, it's a commodity, it creates jobs, that's carbon in the ground, it's carbon in your asphalt, so the next step would be to take that CO2 and put it in the ground. And I think there's a greater understanding and social acceptance of seeing it as a solid first and a gas second. I think we will always be plagued by 2% of the population saying that this isn't safe, it can't be done. And there will always be those who prove them right? That seismicity happens or a massive well integrity failure happens. There will always be that. So I think you have to sort of understand that and work backwards and say, how do we ensure that we're doing it better and safer than everybody else? But I don't think most people, including like my own extended family, would believe CO2 sequestration until they understood it, but they would get there if they understood the pyrolysis. This is a carbon solid. I can touch it. I can feel it. Oh, it's not in the air. It's right there. That's just an opinion. And the Environment Department is very supportive because we can't do things like low carbon intensity hydrogen without CCS. And one last, and a lot of people will hear that and say, well, what about coal? And what about these other types of fuels? I also think we have to meet people where they are. And some, I'm not going to get into that discussion about like, does this mean you're supportive of coal? I think we're supportive of low carbon fuels that meet the ETA and have a proven track record that we can sequester their carbon component in their processing or burning or chemical conversions and things like that.
Thank you. No, I actually had a question because I really like what you are doing. We might have a shorter break. I'm sorry, but I hope everyone is enjoying.
I charge extra though. It's
you will see that with my boss. Yes, manage the finance. So we talk about hydrogen. We talk about CO2, water. I want to talk about methane because we talked about it previously on some of the panel. It was shown on Melanie Canderdine presentations, the impact of the oil and gas industry. So it was on CO2 equivalent, but we still have a lot of methane emission in the state. I saw recently the partnership between DOE and Navajo related to unplugged well. So my question is just, what's your vision on methane emission, unplugged well, things like that?
So as an engineer, I think carbon is equity, and anytime you have carbon like methane, you should be looking at it as equity. How do I reduce that? How do I make money off it? As a regulator, I see it very differently. And to the extent that the feds or the state sets out rules for this is what you can emit, this is the expectation, this is the trust we have in you as a state to produce oil and gas responsibly and in compliance with our regulations. I don't have much pity if you're on the other side of those rules and permits. I'm very clear about that. And somebody has to be, and I'm happily taking that role. I don't have any tolerance for, if you follow me on LinkedIn, I have no tolerance for the Department of Defense contaminating our water with PFAS. I have no tolerance for emissions that give rise to ozone or climate change that are outside of what are allowed by state and federal laws and rules. And that's the job that, I'm hired to do, but it's also the job the legislature put into state law and wants the Environment Department to do, irrespective of me personally. That's the job of the Environment Department. So I see it as, and I've said this since day one, that if you're meeting your permit requirements, thank you. If you're exceeding and investing in New Mexico and doing more to bring down intensity or to clean up water, we want to celebrate you. What can we do? Let's get balloons and a sheet cake. Let's talk about you. And if you're doing less than what we asked you to do or what you told us you could do, then you're going to just talk to our attorneys and have very mean things said about you from me. So I feel like it's very easy to kind of figure out where we're going to be. Now, PV equals nRT. And when you're talking about methane, anytime you bring an atmosphere, you go from high pressure to low pressure, you're going to have losses. And I get that. So there are some excusable moments I can't regulate against Newtonian physics. I say that all the time, but we should have the expectation that if your pressure relief valve lifts, that it reseats, that if your valve packing erodes, that you've put it back in. If the seal on your thief hatch is degraded, that you replace it. Like those are things that are not Newtonian physics, and please don't argue to me that they are. Those are things that are operation and maintenance, and we expect you to do that because you signed up for it.
Very good. Thank you very much, Secretary Kenney.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.